The chalk dust hung in the autumn air of 1878 as Vivian Crawford stared at the empty shelves where supplies should have been, the emptiness mirroring the hollow ache that had settled in her chest since Thomas's passing 3 months ago. Outside the schoolhouse window, the Texas sun bathed Pecos in golden light, but inside, shadows of doubt crept closer with each passing day. Vivian ran her fingertips along the edge of her late husband's desk, remembering how proudly he had stood before the children, the only schoolteacher this growing cattle town had known. The railroad had brought new families, new children who needed educating, but with Thomas gone, the school board was questioning whether a 23-year-old widow could manage alone. 2 weeks, she whispered to herself, repeating the ultimatum given by the town council. 2 weeks to prove the school could function properly, or they would close it until spring when they could bring in a male teacher from back east. 2 weeks with barely any chalk, worn-out primers, and the crushing weight of grief still pressing down on her shoulders. The floorboards creaked behind her. Vivian turned quickly, hand pressed to her heart, to find 8-year-old Sarah Jenkins standing in the doorway, her braids uneven and her eyes large with concern. "Mama says you might be leaving, Miss Crawford," Sarah said quietly. "Is that true?" Vivian knelt before the child, smoothing a wayward strand of hair from the girl's forehead. "I'm doing everything I can to keep our school open, Sarah. Pa says it ain't proper for a woman alone to be teaching all the children now that Mr. Crawford's gone." Sarah's blunt repetition of town gossip stung worse than any deliberate insult. "Well," Vivian said, forcing brightness into her voice, "your pa hasn't seen what we can accomplish together, has he?" She rose to her feet, brushing dust from her black morning skirt. "Now run along home. Tell your mama we begin lessons as planned on Monday." After Sarah left, Vivian leaned heavily against the blackboard, her reflection fractured across its dusty surface. She had taught alongside Thomas for 2 years before their wedding, handling the younger pupils while he taught the older ones. Surely she could manage the 27 students of varying ages by herself. But the town council, led by the banker Mr. Hargrove, seemed determined to see her fail. The setting sun cast long shadows through the windows as Vivian gathered her shawl. She needed to return to the small house she and Thomas had shared. Needed to review the lessons for Monday and perhaps darn some stockings, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from dwelling too deeply on what would happen if she lost the school too. The walk from the schoolhouse to town took 15 minutes, and Vivian nodded politely to the townspeople she passed. Some offered sympathetic smiles, others averted their eyes. Widowhood had placed her in an uncomfortable position in Pecos society, too young to be respectably independent, too educated to be dismissed entirely. As she passed the general store, the owner, Mrs. Patterson, called out from the doorway, "Vivian, I was hoping to catch you. A letter came for you on yesterday's stage." The older woman pressed an envelope into Vivian's hands, her expression curious. "From back east, by the look of it. Thank you." Vivian tucked the letter into her pocket. Probably another condolence note from a distant relative or school friend who had only just heard of Thomas's passing. "How are preparations coming for Monday?" Mrs. Patterson asked, lowering her voice. "The whole town's talking about Hargrove's ultimatum." "As well as can be expected," Vivian replied, unwilling to air her fears publicly. "Though we're short on supplies, I don't suppose you've had any chalk come in." Mrs. Patterson shook her head regretfully. "Not since before the summer." "Might be on next week's shipment, but that won't help you Monday, will it?" "No, it won't." Vivian tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Well, we'll make do somehow. Good evening, Mrs. Patterson." The small house at the edge of town felt emptier than the schoolhouse. Vivian lit a lamp and stared at the simple furnishings the bookshelf Thomas had built, the quilt her mother had made for their wedding, the pair of rocking chairs on the porch where they had planned to sit in old age. She removed the letter from her pocket and broke the seal. It was, as she'd suspected, a belated condolence from a former classmate at the women's seminary she had attended in Pennsylvania. The familiar handwriting brought memories of a time before Pecos, before Thomas, when she had imagined a different future for herself. Vivian placed the letter on the mantel and moved to the kitchen to prepare a simple supper. As she sliced bread, her thoughts returned to the school's predicament. She had 7 pieces of chalk remaining, barely enough for a day's lessons. The copybooks were filled, the maps torn, and the primer books shared by too many children already. She needed supplies, but her small teacher's salary, the council had cut it by 1/3 after Thomas's death, claiming a woman required less barely covered food and necessities. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams filled with empty classrooms and disapproving faces. When dawn broke, Vivian rose with determination. She would spend Saturday preparing the schoolhouse, Sunday in prayer for guidance, and Monday would face whatever challenges came with as much dignity as she could muster. The weekend passed in a blur of activity. Vivian swept the schoolhouse, arranged the desks, carefully planned how to stretch the minimal supplies, and prepared lessons that could be taught with minimal writing. By Sunday evening, she had done all she could. Whatever happened now was in God's hands. Monday morning arrived with a brilliant sunrise and an unexpected commotion outside the schoolhouse. Vivian had arrived early to find a small crowd gathered near the steps. For one terrible moment, she feared Hargrove had decided to close the school without even giving her the promised 2 weeks. Instead, she found herself face to face with a tall, broad-shouldered man she had never seen before. He stood beside a loaded pack horse, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of a well-worn hat. The morning sun glinted off his dark hair and cast shadows across features that might have been considered handsome if not for the scar that ran along his jawline. "Miss Crawford, I presume." His voice was deeper than she expected, with a slight drawl that suggested Texas roots despite his formal speech. "Mrs. Crawford," she corrected automatically. "I'm the teacher here." A flicker of something embarrassment perhaps crossed his face. "My apologies, madam. Mason Reed." He tipped his hat slightly. "I've brought something that might be of use." From his saddlebag, he produced a wooden box. When he opened it, Vivian caught her breath. Inside, nestled in straw, were dozens of pieces of pristine white chalk. "Where did you?" she began, but he was already reaching for another package on his horse. "And these?" He handed her a stack of blank copy books. "Heard there was a school in need." The small crowd of townspeople murmured. Vivian recognized several school board members among them, including Hargrove, whose frown had deepened. "I don't understand," Vivian said softly, clutching the precious supplies. "Why would you bring these? How did you know?" Mason Reed's eyes, a startling shade of blue against his sun-darkened skin, met hers directly. "Word travels. Folks talking in Odessa about a widow teacher about to lose her school. Seemed a shame when the fix was so simple." He reached into his pocket and pressed something else into her hand, several dollars, more than enough to purchase additional supplies. "I can't accept money from a stranger," she protested, trying to return it. His hand closed over hers briefly, warm and calloused. "Not charity, madam. Investment. Education matters out here." Then he nodded toward the schoolhouse door. "Teach on. I'll help." Before Vivian could respond, the children began arriving, staring curiously at the stranger with his pack horse. Parents followed, watching the interaction with undisguised interest. Hargrove stepped forward, his banker's suit immaculate even in the dusty morning. "And who exactly might you be, mister? We don't take kindly to drifters interfering in town business." Mason straightened to his full height, several inches taller than Hargrove. "Mason Reid. Cattle buyer from San Antonio originally. And I'm not drifting, sir. I've purchased the old Miller property outside town, planning to raise horses." This announcement caused another ripple of whispers. The Miller ranch had been vacant for over a year since the family had moved north after consecutive drought seasons. "Well, Mr. Reid," Hargrove said stiffly, "while your assistance with school supplies is noted, the council has concerns beyond mere chalk about Mrs. Crawford's ability to maintain order and proper education standards without her husband." "That right?" Mason's voice remained level, but Vivian noticed his jaw tighten slightly. "Well, I'd say giving the lady a fair chance would be the Christian thing to do, especially considering I've heard she was teaching alongside her husband for years before his passing." Several parents nodded in agreement. Vivian stood straighter, feeling a surge of gratitude toward this unexpected ally. "The school bell's about to ring," she announced, finding her voice at last. "Children should head inside and get settled." Then, turning to Mason Reid, she added more quietly, "Thank you for the supplies, Mr. Reid. They're truly a godsend." "My pleasure, Mrs. Crawford." Something in his expression softened. "And that offer to help stands. I had some schooling back east myself. If you need an extra hand with the older boys or anything else, you just say the word." As the children filed into the schoolhouse, Vivian felt the weight on her shoulders lighten slightly. She had chalk. She had copybooks. And somehow she had found an ally in this stranger who had appeared like an answer to prayer. The first day passed in a blur of activity. With proper supplies, Vivian was able to conduct lessons much as she and Thomas had planned them together. The children seemed relieved that their education would continue, though the older boys tested her authority repeatedly, perhaps sensing the precariousness of her position. When the final bell rang and the children departed, Vivian sank into her chair, exhausted but satisfied. She had survived day 1. 13 more to go before the council would make their decision. A knock at the open door drew her attention. Mason Reid stood there, hat in hand, looking somewhat out of place in the small schoolroom. "Hope I'm not intruding, Mrs. Crawford." "Just wanted to see how your first day fared." Vivian found herself smiling despite her fatigue. "Better than expected, thanks to your generosity. Please come in." He stepped inside, his tall frame making the room seem smaller. "Got word that some of the older boys were planning mischief." "Williams's son and the Thornton boy," Vivian sighed. "James Williams and Peter Thornton. Yes, they were certainly challenging today." She didn't mention how James had deliberately spilled ink on the floor, or how Peter had made the younger children laugh by mimicking her voice when her back was turned. Challenging is a polite way to put it. Mason leaned against one of the student desks, which seemed comically small beneath him. "Their fathers are on the council. No coincidence there, I'd wager. Mr. Reid." "Mason, if you please." "Mason, then. I appreciate your concern, but I need to handle this situation carefully. The council is looking for any excuse to say a woman can't maintain discipline." He nodded thoughtfully. "Fair enough, but there's no rule says you can't have help, is there? Many schools back east have assistants." Vivian considered this. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Let me help with the older boys a few days a week. Mathematics, perhaps. I studied engineering before." Well, before life took a different turn. Something flickered across his face, a shadow of some old pain quickly concealed. "Might help keep them in line if they see a man respecting your authority." It was a tempting offer. The older boys were indeed her greatest challenge, and having assistance with them would allow her to focus more attention on the younger children. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "You don't know me. You've just arrived in Pecos. Why take such an interest in our school?" Mason was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the dusty street beyond. "Education changed my life once, opened doors that would have stayed closed to a ranch hand's son." He turned back to her, his expression earnest. "And I know what it's like to have people decide your worth based on circumstances beyond your control." There was more to his story, Vivian sensed, but she didn't press. Everyone in the West carried their histories close, revealing them only in fragments, if at all. "Very well," she said finally. "If you're serious about helping, perhaps you could come Wednesday morning. The older boys have mathematics then." The smile that spread across his face transformed his features, softening the hardness around his eyes. "Wednesday it is, Mrs. Crawford." "Vivian," she said impulsively. "If we're to be colleagues of sorts, you should call me Vivian." "Vivian." He said her name carefully, as if testing the feel of it. "Until Wednesday, then." After he left, Vivian sat alone in the schoolhouse, wondering what twist of fate had brought Mason Reed to Pecos at precisely the moment she needed help. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt a flutter of something besides grief in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. Word spread quickly through Pecos about the arrangement. By Tuesday morning, when Vivian arrived at the schoolhouse, she found several mothers waiting with their children, curious about the newcomer who had taken such an interest in the school. "Is it true he's from San Antonio, Mrs. Jenkins asked as she straightened Sarah's collar. "My cousin lives there. Says the Reed family owns half the cattle business in that region." "I couldn't say," Vivian replied, unlocking the schoolhouse door. "He mentioned being a cattle buyer, but we didn't discuss his family connections." Mrs. Thornton, Peter's mother, sniffed disapprovingly. "Well, I think it's highly irregular for a single man to be involving himself with the school. What do we really know about him?" "We know he provided much-needed supplies when no one else would," Vivian answered, more sharply than she intended. Immediately regretting her tone, she softened her voice. "Mr. Reed has offered to assist with mathematics for the older students. Given the range of ages I'm teaching, I believe this arrangement benefits everyone." The women exchanged glances, but before they could respond, the children began filing into the schoolhouse for the day's lessons. Tuesday passed uneventfully, though Vivian noticed James Williams watching her with calculating eyes. She wondered what challenge he would present tomorrow when Mason came to teach. Wednesday dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn day. Vivian dressed with extra care, selecting her gray wool dress instead of the black she had worn since Thomas's passing. She still wore her mourning brooch, a small oval containing a lock of her husband's hair, but the lighter color felt like a tentative step forward. Thomas would not have wanted her to remain draped in black forever. Mason arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, carrying a leather satchel and dressed in clean, simple clothing, not the rough garb of a cowhand, but not the formal attire of Pecos's businessmen either. He had clearly made an effort to appear professional while still maintaining his own identity. "Good morning," he greeted the class, standing beside Vivian's desk with an ease that suggested he was not entirely uncomfortable in a classroom setting. "Mrs. Crawford has kindly allowed me to assist with mathematics instruction for the older students today." James Williams raised his hand immediately, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Reed, but what qualifies a cowboy to teach arithmetic?" Several students snickered. Vivian opened her mouth to reprimand James, but Mason spoke first. "A fair question, Mr. Williams." His tone was respectful but firm. I attended the Massachusetts Institute of Technology for 2 years studying engineering before family circumstances called me home to Texas. Mathematics was always my strongest subject. He glanced at the slate in James's hands. I'd be happy to demonstrate by checking your work on yesterday's problems. James's smirk faltered. Vivian hid a smile as she directed the younger children to their reading lessons, while Mason worked with the older students at the back of the room. Throughout the morning, she found her attention continually drawn to the deep rumble of Mason's voice as he patiently explained concepts, praised correct answers, and redirected misunderstandings. He had a natural gift for teaching, breaking down complex ideas into manageable parts and relating them to the students' daily lives. If a cattle buyer offers $12 per head for 75 cattle, but your father believes they're worth $13.50 each, what's the difference in total payment? He asked, creating problems relevant to the children's world. By lunchtime, even James Williams was grudgingly engaged, his earlier defiance replaced by concentration as he worked through the problems Mason had set. When the noon bell rang, the students filed out to eat their packed lunches under the trees outside. "You're a natural teacher," Vivian commented as she and Mason remained inside. "Where did you really learn to teach like that?" Mason's smile held a hint of sadness. "My mother. She was a school teacher back in Pennsylvania before she married my father and moved west. She taught me at home until I was 12, then convinced my father to send me to school in San Antonio. After that, it was the Institute in Massachusetts until family circumstances called you home," Vivian finished, recalling his earlier explanation. "I'm sorry. Was it your father?" He nodded. "Cattle business has its ups and downs. When things went bad, he needed help. By the time we got things stabilized, going back east didn't seem important anymore." He paused, studying her face. "May I ask about your husband? People in town speak well of him." The question caught Vivian off guard. Few people asked directly about Thomas anymore, preferring to speak around his death as if mentioning it might somehow make her grief contagious. "Thomas was a good man," she said quietly. "A devoted teacher. He caught pneumonia last winter after rescuing the Sanderson boy who fell through the ice on Miller's Pond. He seemed to recover, but then took ill again in the summer. The doctor said his lungs never properly healed." Mason's expression was one of genuine sympathy, without the awkward pity she had grown accustomed to. "I'm sorry. Sounds like he was the kind of man who put others first." "He was." Vivian smiled at the memory. "We had plans to expand the school as Pecos grew. He believed education was the foundation of civilization, especially out here where everything is still being built." "A man ahead of his time," Mason observed. "And you share his vision." "I do." Vivian straightened the papers on her desk. "Though the town council seems to think such visions should die with the man who had them. Then they underestimate the power of a determined widow," Mason said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Something tells me that's a mistake." The afternoon lessons resumed with renewed energy. Having Mason handle the older students allowed Vivian to give proper attention to the younger children, and by the end of the day, she felt she had accomplished more than in any day since Thomas's death. As the children departed, Mason lingered, helping to clean the blackboards and straighten the room. "Same time Friday?" he asked, replacing the chalk in its box. "If you're willing," Vivian replied. "The children responded well to you." "Even Williams and Thornton," Mason observed with a slight smile. "Though I suspect they'll test us again before they fully surrender." "Us," Vivian repeated softly. It had been a long time since she had been part of an us in any context. "Yes, I imagine they will." As they walked together to the schoolhouse door, Vivian suddenly remembered something. You mentioned purchasing the Miller property. That's a substantial undertaking for one man. I've hired help coming from San Antonio next month, Mason explained as they stepped outside into the golden afternoon light. Meanwhile, I'm getting the house in order and assessing what's needed most. The previous owners let things deteriorate considerably. Yes, the drought years were hard on them, Vivian nodded. The children missed Daisy Miller when they left. She was a sweet girl. The property has good bones, though, strong foundation. Mason locked eyes with her. Sometimes that's all you need to rebuild something worthwhile. Vivian had the distinct impression they were no longer talking about the Miller ranch. The intensity of his gaze made her cheeks warm, and she looked away first. "Will you be at church on Sunday?" she asked, changing the subject. The congregation would probably welcome a chance to meet Pecos' newest resident properly. "I'll be there," he promised, placing his hat on his head. "Thank you for allowing me to help today, Vivian. It meant more than you know." As Mason walked away toward where his horse was tethered, Vivian remained on the schoolhouse steps, watching his retreating figure. For the first time in months, she felt a strange lightness in her step as she gathered her things and headed home. The remainder of the week passed in a blur of lessons, with Friday bringing Mason's return as promised. The students had clearly been discussing him between sessions, as they arrived with more thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in his explanations of how mathematics applied to everything from building construction to cattle trading. On Sunday, Vivian dressed in her best church dress, still black, as befitting her mourning period, but with a trim of dark purple that suggested the first tentative step toward returning to the world of the living. She arranged her hair carefully, then scolded herself for such vanity. Mason Reed was a kind man who had helped her school, nothing more. The fact that his blue eyes and gentle smile had begun appearing in her thoughts at odd moments was irrelevant. The small white church was already filling when Vivian arrived. She took her usual seat in the third pew, nodding politely to neighbors and returning their greetings. As the organ began to play, she noticed Mason enter through the back door. He was dressed in a well-tailored dark suit that suggested he had indeed come from means, whatever his current circumstances. Several young women turned to look at him, and Vivian felt an unexpected twinge of something that couldn't possibly be jealousy. Pastor Green welcomed the congregation and made a point of introducing Mason as a newcomer, inviting him to stand briefly. Mason acknowledged the introduction with a polite nod, then, to Vivian's surprise, made his way to her pew and gestured questioningly to the empty space beside her. She nodded, and he slid in next to her, his large frame making the small pew feel suddenly crowded. Throughout the service, Vivian was acutely aware of his presence. They shared a hymnal, his fingers occasionally brushing hers as they turned the pages. He listened attentively to Pastor Green's sermon on perseverance through trials, and when the collection plate was passed, Vivian noticed he contributed generously. After the service, they found themselves surrounded by curious townspeople. Mason handled the attention with gracious ease, answering questions about his plans for the Miller property and deflecting more personal inquiries with good humor. "Mr. Reed," Hargrove's voice cut through the pleasant conversations. The banker approached with several council members in tow. "I understand you've been playing schoolmaster this week." "Assisting Mrs. Crawford," Mason corrected smoothly. "She's the teacher. I'm merely lending a hand with mathematics for the older students." "Indeed." Hargrove's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "The council will be evaluating Mrs. Crawford's progress at the end of next week. I trust your assistance won't unduly influence our assessment of her capabilities." Vivian stiffened, Mr. Hargrove, I welcome any evaluation of my teaching. The children's progress speaks for itself. We shall see." Hargrove nodded curtly and moved away, his group following. "That man," Mason murmured, watching them go, "seems unnaturally invested in seeing you fail." Thomas once opposed his plan to relocate the school to make way for expanding his bank, Vivian explained quietly. "I think he sees me as an easier target to remove than my husband was." Before Mason could respond, Mrs. Patterson approached, her usual friendly smile in place. "Vivian, dear, I'm hosting Sunday dinner today. Mr. Reed, you'd be most welcome to join us. Several families from the school will be there." "That's very kind, thank you," Mason replied. He glanced at Vivian. "Will you be attending?" "I had planned to," Vivian admitted. Sunday dinners with friends had been rare since Thomas's death, but Mrs. Patterson had been gently persistent in her invitations. "Then I'd be delighted," Mason told Mrs. Patterson. The Patterson home was one of the nicer houses in Pecos, situated on a corner lot with a wraparound porch. Mrs. Patterson's husband owned the general store and had prospered with the town's growth. Their dining room comfortably accommodated the dozen guests who gathered around the table laden with roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from Mrs. Patterson's garden. Vivian found herself seated beside Mason, with the Jenkins family across from them. Sarah Jenkins beamed at seeing her teacher outside of school, while Mr. Jenkins engaged Mason in conversation about horse breeding prospects in the region. "The Miller place has good grazing land," Mr. Jenkins observed. "Shame about their luck with the drought." "I'm planning to dig a deeper well," Mason replied, "and implement some irrigation techniques I saw in California. Should help weather the dry spells better." "California," Mrs. Jenkins perked up. "You've traveled extensively then." "Some," Mason acknowledged. "After leaving school, I worked for my father's cattle business, which took me through most of the Western territories. Spent time in Colorado, California, even up to Montana once." As the meal progressed, Vivian watched Mason interact with her neighbors. He was well-spoken but unpretentious, knowledgeable without being condescending. He asked thoughtful questions about Pecos and its history, genuinely interested in the community he had joined. "How long have you been teaching, Mrs. Crawford?" Mrs. Thornton asked suddenly, her tone just shy of challenging. "Nearly 4 years now," Vivian answered. 2 years at a girls' school in San Antonio, then alongside my husband here in Pecos for the past 2 years. "It must be difficult managing alone," Mrs. Thornton persisted. "Especially with the older boys. Peter says they've been much better behaved with Mr. Reed present. Different students respond to different teaching approaches," Vivian said diplomatically. "Having Mr. Reed assist with mathematics allows me to give more attention to the younger children. It's a beneficial arrangement for everyone." "Very progressive," Mr. Patterson commented approvingly. "Like those schools back east with multiple teachers. Shows Pecos is growing up." The conversation shifted to town developments, and Vivian felt Mason's hand briefly touch hers beneath the table, a small gesture of support that warmed her more than it should have. After dinner, the men moved to the porch to smoke, while the women cleared the table and prepared coffee and dessert. In the kitchen, Vivian became acutely aware of the speculative glances being exchanged around her. "Mr. Reed seems quite taken with our school," Mrs. Patterson observed, cutting slices of apple pie. "And perhaps with its teacher as well, Martha." Vivian protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Reed is being kind and supportive of education, nothing more." "If you say so, dear," Mrs. Patterson replied, not entirely convinced. "But a man doesn't ride all the way from Odessa with chalk and copy books on a whim." nor does he spend his mornings teaching children when he has a ranch to rebuild. Thomas hasn't been gone 6 months, Vivian said softly. Even if there were interest, it would be disrespectful to his memory. Mrs. Jenkins patted her arm gently. Thomas would want you to be happy, Vivian. Everyone who knew him knows that. When they rejoined the men with coffee and pie, Vivian found herself once again beside Mason. As conversations flowed around them, he spoke quietly for her ears alone. Thank you for including me today. It's been a while since I've enjoyed a proper Sunday dinner with good company. Thank you for coming, she replied. The children's parents seem impressed with your teaching. All I did was show them how to apply numbers to things they care about, he said modestly. You've done the real work, building their foundation. As the afternoon waned, guests began to depart. Mason offered to walk Vivian home, and despite the knowing looks from Mrs. Patterson, she accepted. The autumn air had turned cooler, and Vivian wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders as they walked the quiet streets of Pecos. You've made quite an impression on everyone, she commented as they passed the shuttered storefronts of the Sunday quiet town. Mrs. Patterson is practically ready to nominate you for mayor. Mason laughed, the sound rich and genuine. I'm just trying to be a good neighbor. My father always said reputation is built on small actions repeated consistently. Your father sounds wise. He was. The past tense hung in the air between them. He passed last year. That's what finally freed me to leave San Antonio. My younger brother has taken over the family business there. I'm sorry for your loss, Vivian said softly. It doesn't get easier exactly, but more manageable with time. Mason nodded, understanding in his eyes. Is that why you stayed in Pecos? After your husband passed, partly, Vivian admitted. The school needs me, and Thomas is buried here, but also, I have nowhere else to go. My parents died years ago. Teaching is all I know. They had reached her small house. The setting sun cast long shadows across the porch where 2 rocking chairs sat empty, a poignant reminder of plans never to be fulfilled. Will you be coming to the school again this week? Vivian asked, suddenly reluctant for their walk to end. If you'll have me, Mason replied. Perhaps Tuesday and Thursday. That would give us 3 days of mathematics instruction before the council's evaluation on Friday. That would be wonderful. Vivian hesitated, then added, the children truly do benefit from your teaching. Whatever happens with the council's decision, I want you to know that. The council will see what I already have, Mason said firmly. That Pecos is fortunate to have you as its teacher. His eyes held hers for a long moment, and Vivian felt that same fluttering sensation in her chest. Good night, Vivian. Good night, Mason. Inside her empty house, Vivian moved through her evening routine with her mind elsewhere. She tried to analyze her feelings logically, as Thomas had always encouraged her to do with difficult problems. Mason Reed was kind, intelligent, and unexpectedly gentle for a man of his size and background. He had helped her when no one else would. It was natural to feel gratitude and friendship toward him. But there was more, a warmth that spread through her whenever he was near, a awareness of him that went beyond simple appreciation, and that frightened her. Thomas had been gone less than 6 months. What kind of widow contemplated such feelings so soon? She touched the mourning brooch at her collar, guilt mixing with the unfamiliar emotions swirling inside her. I'm sorry, Thomas, she whispered to the empty room. I'm not forgetting you. I could never forget you. That night, her dreams were a confused tangle of memories: Thomas's laugh, the classroom full of children, and Mason's blue eyes looking at her as if she were something precious to be protected. The following week brought a renewed sense of purpose to the school. Mason arrived as promised on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday mornings, working with the older students while Vivian taught the younger ones. By the third session, they had developed an easy rhythm, moving around each other in the small classroom with the coordination of dancers who had practiced together for years. The children responded to this arrangement with enthusiasm. Even James Williams and Peter Thornton had abandoned their disruptive behaviors, genuinely engaged in the challenging mathematical problems Mason created for them. The younger children flourished under Vivian's undivided attention, making rapid progress in their reading and basic arithmetic. On Friday afternoon, as the children were dismissed, 3 members of the town council arrived for their evaluation. Hargrove led the group, accompanied by Mr. Thornton and Mr. Williams. They observed the orderly departure of the students and the tidy condition of the schoolroom with expressions that revealed little. "Mrs. Crawford," Hargrove began formally, "the council assigned me to evaluate your progress over these 2 weeks. I see Mr. Reed has continued his involvement. Mr. Reed has generously volunteered his time to assist with mathematics instruction for the older students," Vivian confirmed, standing tall beside her desk. "As the school grows, having specialized instruction benefits all the children." "Indeed." Hargrove's tone suggested skepticism. "And what of discipline? We've received reports of difficulties maintaining order." "Those reports must be outdated," Mason interjected smoothly. "I've observed Mrs. Crawford's classroom management to be exemplary. The students are engaged, respectful, and making excellent progress." Mr. Williams cleared his throat. "My son James reports he's learned more mathematics in the past 2 weeks than in the previous term." "That would be Mr. Reed's influence, I presume," Hargrove said with a thin smile. "It's a collaborative effort," Mason replied before Vivian could speak. "Mrs. Crawford established the foundation upon which we're building. My contribution is merely supplementary." Mr. Thornton, who had been examining the students' work displayed on the walls, turned to Vivian. "These compositions from the younger children show remarkable improvement." "Peter mentioned the little ones are doing better without the older boys distracting you." Vivian nodded. "Having assistance with the older students allows me to give proper attention to each age group. It's an approach many larger schools employ." Hargrove seemed displeased by his colleague's positive observations. "The question remains whether this arrangement is sustainable. Mr. Reed, I understand you have a ranch to develop. Surely your charity cannot continue indefinitely." Mason met the banker's gaze steadily. "I've found the time spent teaching rewarding, Mr. Hargrove. I intend to continue as long as Mrs. Crawford finds my assistance valuable." A tense silence followed this declaration. Finally, Mr. Williams spoke. "I move that we recommend to the full council that the school continue under Mrs. Crawford's direction, with Mr. Reed's volunteer assistance welcomed but not required for her continued employment." "Seconded," Mr. Thornton said promptly, Hargrove's lips thinned to a nearly invisible line. "Very well. I'll present your recommendation at Monday's meeting. Good day, Mrs. Crawford, Mr. Reed." After the council members departed, Vivian let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That went better than I expected." Williams and Thornton were impressed by their son's progress, Mason observed, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Nothing convinces a father faster than seeing his son enthusiastic about learning. "I still can't believe Hargrove will give up so easily," Vivian said, beginning to gather her things. "He seemed determined to close the school." "He wanted to expand his bank onto this property," Mason replied thoughtfully. "But with community support behind you, he'll need to find another location." Vivian paused, turning to look at Mason fully. "How do you know about his expansion plans?" A slight flush colored Mason's cheeks. I may have made some inquiries after our conversation last Sunday. Wanted to understand what we were facing. We, Vivian repeated softly. Mason took a step closer. Yes, we, Vivian, I. He hesitated, then continued more carefully. I came to Pecos looking for a fresh start. I never expected to find someone like you. Vivian's heart hammered in her chest. Mason, I'm still in mourning. It's too soon for I know, he interrupted gently. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. Just the chance to continue working alongside you, to be your friend, and perhaps, someday, something more. The sincerity in his eyes made Vivian's breath catch. I can't make any promises. I'm not asking for promises. Mason smiled. Just possibilities. After a moment's hesitation, Vivian nodded. Possibilities, then, and friendship. That's more than enough for now. Mason's relief was palpable. May I walk you home? The autumn afternoon was perfect for walking. Crisp air, golden sunlight filtering through trees beginning to shed their leaves, the distant mountains etched sharply against the blue sky. As they walked, Mason told her more about his plans for the Miller property. The house needs work, but it's solid. I'm thinking of adding a proper library. I brought most of my books from San Antonio. You're a reader? Vivian asked, pleasantly surprised. My mother's influence again. She believed books were windows to worlds we might never see otherwise. His expression softened with memory. She would have liked you. Tell me about her, Vivian encouraged, realizing how little she still knew about this man who had become so important to her school and, increasingly, to her. As they walked the half-mile to her home, Mason shared stories of his childhood, his educated mother who had fallen in love with a Texas rancher. His years divided between books and horseback. His brother who had embraced the cattle business wholeheartedly, while Mason had always yearned for something more balanced between intellect and action. That's why the Miller place appealed to me, he explained as they reached her porch. Small enough to manage differently than my father's operation, close to town, with good land for horses rather than cattle, and now with the school. You're putting down roots, Vivian observed. Trying to, he acknowledged. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing my own path rather than following family expectations. Vivian thought about her own journey, how she had come to Pecos, following Thomas's dream of building a school on the frontier. How his death had forced her to decide whether to continue alone or return east to the security of established schools and family connections. It takes courage, she said softly, choosing to stay when it would be easier to leave. Yes, Mason agreed, his eyes holding hers. But the things most worth having rarely come easily. For a moment they stood in silence, the autumn breeze rustling the leaves around them. Then Mason tipped his hat. Until Monday, Vivian. Until Monday, she echoed, watching him walk away before entering her empty house that somehow felt less lonely than before. The weekend passed slowly. Vivian attended church on Sunday, where Pastor Green made a point of praising the school's progress from the pulpit. Mason sat beside her again, his presence drawing curious glances, but increasingly accepting smiles from the congregation. Afterward, they shared another Sunday dinner at the Pattersons, where conversation flowed easily among neighbors who were beginning to see them as a natural pair, despite the recency of Vivian's widowhood. Monday morning brought news that the town council had officially voted to keep the school open under Vivian's leadership, with appreciation extended to Mason for his voluntary assistance. The salary cut implemented after Thomas's death was restored, with the council acknowledging that running the school alone merited full compensation. The following weeks established a new routine. Mason came to the school 3 mornings each week, working with the older students while Vivian taught the younger ones. In the afternoons, They sometimes combined the groups for history lessons or reading, with Mason often sharing stories of places he had visited that brought the geography in their worn textbooks to life. As October gave way to November, the weather turned colder. Mason arrived one morning with a wagon load of firewood for the school's stove, explaining that he had cleared some land on his property and thought the school could use the extra fuel for winter. The council allocated funds for coal, Vivian protested as he stacked the wood neatly behind the schoolhouse. Coal's expensive and the allocation is never enough, Mason replied practically. This wood needs to be used anyway. Might as well keep the children warm. His thoughtfulness extended beyond practical matters. When Vivian mentioned needing new maps to replace the tattered ones hanging on the walls, Mason wrote to his brother in San Antonio, who sent a complete set that had been used in a school there but were still in good condition. When the roof began leaking after a heavy rain, Mason organized a Saturday work party of fathers to repair it properly before winter set in. Through it all, he remained respectful of Vivian's position both as the school's teacher and as a widow still navigating her grief. He never pressed for more than friendship, though his eyes sometimes lingered on her face in ways that made her heart race. They developed a comfortable camaraderie, sharing books from his growing library, discussing teaching approaches, and gradually learning the contours of each other's minds. As Thanksgiving approached, Vivian found herself facing the prospect of her first major holiday without Thomas. In previous years, they had hosted a small dinner for those in town without family nearby. This year, the thought of celebrating in her empty house filled her with dread. After school one Thursday in mid-November, Mason lingered as the children departed. "I wanted to ask you something," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "About Thanksgiving." "Yes," Vivian prompted, wondering if he had plans to travel to San Antonio to be with his brother. "I know it must be difficult facing the holiday without your husband," Mason said carefully. "I thought perhaps. Well, the Miller house is finally habitable, not fancy but comfortable. I'd like to host a Thanksgiving dinner there, for you and perhaps some of the children's families who might not have large gatherings of their own." The thoughtfulness of his suggestion brought unexpected tears to Vivian's eyes. "That's very kind, Mason." "You don't have to answer now," he added quickly. "Just think about it. And if you'd prefer a quieter day, I understand completely." Vivian considered the alternative, sitting alone in her house with memories of happier Thanksgivings, trying not to compare this year to those past. "No, I think your idea is lovely. Thomas and I used to host dinner for those without family nearby. Continuing that tradition would honor his memory better than my sitting alone." The smile that lit Mason's face warmed her from within. "Wonderful. I'll speak with Mrs. Patterson about which families might appreciate an invitation." In the days leading up to Thanksgiving, Vivian found herself looking forward to the holiday rather than dreading it. Mason had invited several families from the school, the Wilsons, whose farm had struggled that year, the widow Johnson and her 3 children, and young Mr. Clark, the new telegraph operator who had no family west of the Mississippi. The day before Thanksgiving, school dismissed early to allow families time to prepare for the holiday. As the children departed with excited chatter about the next day's feast, Mason approached Vivian's desk. "Would you like to see the house?" he asked. "It's still a work in progress, but I'd value your opinion before tomorrow's gathering." Curious about the home he had been renovating, Vivian agreed. They walked together toward the edge of town, following the road that led to what had once been the Miller property. As they crested a small rise, the house came into view, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch, freshly painted white with green shutters. "Mason, it's beautiful," Vivian exclaimed. taking in the transformation from the neglected building she remembered. "Wait until you see inside before you make that judgment," he cautioned with a smile. "I've focused on making it functional. Aesthetics are still developing." As they approached, Vivian noticed other improvements. A new well had been dug closer to the house. The barn had been repaired, and several corrals had been built to accommodate the horses Mason planned to raise. A vegetable garden had been cleared and prepared for spring planting, and young fruit trees lined the drive. Inside, the house was indeed functional rather than fancy, but Vivian was impressed by the thought that had gone into the renovations. The main room had been expanded by removing a wall, creating a space large enough for the planned Thanksgiving gathering. Bookshelves lined one wall, already filled with volumes Mason had brought from San Antonio. Simple but sturdy furniture created comfortable seating areas, and the kitchen boasted a new cookstove. "You've accomplished all this while helping at the school," Vivian marveled, running her hand along the smooth surface of a pine table that would seat 12 comfortably. "Hired help with the major construction," Mason admitted, "but I've done most of the finishing work myself. It's satisfying, creating something with your hands." He showed her the rest of the house, 4 bedrooms upstairs, one of which he had set up as a study with a desk, positioned to catch the morning light, a pantry well stocked for winter, and a small room off the kitchen that he had outfitted as a washroom with a copper tub and pump that brought water directly inside. "It's wonderful," Vivian said sincerely as they returned to the main room. "You've created a real home here." "It's getting there," Mason agreed, looking around with quiet pride, "missing some things still." His eyes met hers briefly, and Vivian understood what remained unspoken, that a house, however well appointed, was not truly a home without love within its walls. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities neither was quite ready to name. Finally, Mason cleared his throat. "I should get you back to town before dark." As they walked back toward Pecos, Vivian found herself imagining what it would be like to belong in that house, to fill its rooms with children's laughter and the comfortable routines of shared days. The thought no longer filled her with guilt as it might have months ago. Thomas would always be part of her heart, but he had never been the type to wish her to live half a life in his absence. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to stretch forever above the Texas plains. Vivian dressed carefully in a dress of deep burgundy, her first non-black garment since Thomas's death. The color felt both festive and respectful, acknowledging the holiday while still honoring her status as a widow. She had baked 2 pumpkin pies and a loaf of cranberry bread the previous evening, and she gathered these carefully before walking to the the Reed house. She corrected herself mentally. The name change was just one of many transformations the property had undergone in the months since Mason's arrival in Pecos. As she approached the house, Vivian was struck again by how welcoming it appeared, smoke curling from the chimney, windows gleaming in the morning sun, the fresh paint bright against the backdrop of winter-brown fields. Mason must have been watching for her arrival, for the front door opened as she reached the porch steps. "Happy Thanksgiving," he greeted, taking the basket of baked goods from her arms. "You look beautiful, Vivian." The compliment brought warmth to her cheeks. "Thank you." The burgundy felt appropriate somehow, not quite ready for brighter colors, but "it's perfect," Mason assured her, understanding in his eyes. "Come in, you're the first to arrive, but the Wilsons and Mrs. Johnson should be here soon." Inside, the house had been transformed for the holiday. The long table was set with Mason's best dishes, not fancy china, but good quality stoneware in warm earth tones. A fire crackled in the hearth, filling the room with warmth and the scent of pine wood. From the kitchen came the mouth-watering aroma of roasting turkey and baking bread. "You've been busy," Vivian observed, noticing the sprigs of evergreen arranged on the mantel and the polished appearance of everything. "Did you do all this yourself?" "Mrs. Patterson sent her girl over yesterday to help with some of the cleaning," Mason admitted with a smile. "But the cooking is all my responsibility. My mother insisted her sons learn their way around a kitchen, said no man should be helpless when it came to feeding himself." "A wise woman," Vivian commented, following him into the kitchen where various pots bubbled on the stove and a magnificent turkey roasted in the oven. "Can I help?" "You can mash the potatoes when they're done boiling," Mason suggested. "But first, would you like some coffee?" "It's a bit early for the wine I've set aside for dinner." They worked together comfortably in the kitchen until the first guests arrived. The Wilsons came bearing a basket of fresh rolls and applesauce made from the last of their orchard's harvest. Mrs. Johnson and her children followed shortly after, the younger ones immediately drawn to the windows to watch for the telegraph operator, Mr. Clark, who had promised to show them how to make paper cornucopias. By early afternoon, the house was filled with conversation and laughter. The children played games in the yard when not helping with small tasks, and the adults shared stories of Thanksgivings past and hopes for the coming year. When they gathered around the table, Pastor Green, who had accepted a last-minute invitation, offered a blessing that acknowledged both the sorrows and joys of the year now ending. "We especially thank you, Lord, for new beginnings," he concluded, with a glance toward Mason at the head of the table and Vivian beside him. "For the strength to carry on when paths grow difficult, and for the friends who walk alongside us when we need support." The meal was everything a Thanksgiving feast should be: abundant, delicious, and shared with people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. As Vivian looked around the table at faces that had become dear to her over the months, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. 6 months ago, she had feared losing everything that mattered: the school, her purpose, her connection to the community. Now, against all expectations, she had found not only security but new joy. Her eyes met Mason's across the table, and the warmth in his gaze told her he was thinking something similar. They had both found unexpected gifts in Pecos. After the meal, while the other guests helped clear the table and prepare dessert, Mason drew Vivian aside to the small study off the main room. From his desk drawer, he removed a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly seeming nervous. "An early Christmas gift, I suppose, though that wasn't my intention when I ordered it." Curious, Vivian untied the string and carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of leaves and flowers. When she opened it, she found it filled with pieces of chalk, not ordinary school chalk, but special colored chalks in vibrant hues. "Mason," she breathed, running her fingers over the rainbow of colors. "These are magnificent. Where did you find them?" "Wrote to a supplier in New York," he explained. "Thought they might be useful for your science and geography lessons. The colors could help distinguish different regions on maps, different types of plants and animals." Vivian was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift, not just its practicality for her teaching, but how it represented his understanding of her passion for education. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll treasure these." Mason cleared his throat. "There's something else I wanted to say, Vivian. Something I've been thinking about for some time." The seriousness of his tone made her heart quicken. "Yes, when I came to Pecos, I wasn't looking for connections. After my father died, I just wanted somewhere quiet to build something of my own." His eyes held hers steadily. But then I met you and everything changed." Vivian felt a lump forming in her throat. "Mason," he raised a hand gently. "Please let me finish. I know it's been less than a year since Thomas passed. I know you're still healing. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you ever are, I'll be here." "What exactly are you saying?" Vivian asked, needing to hear the words. "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Vivian Crawford." Mason's voice was steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "With your strength, your dedication to your students, your kindness. I love how your face lights up when a child understands a difficult concept. I love your quiet determination to honor Thomas's memory by continuing his work." Tears filled Vivian's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Mason assured her. "This isn't a question requiring an answer. It's just a truth I wanted you to know." Vivian looked down at the box of colored chalk in her hands, such a simple gift on the surface, yet representing so much more. Like Mason himself, it was practical and thoughtful, bringing unexpected color to a life that had faded to grayscale with grief. "I care for you too," she said finally, raising her eyes to meet his. "More than I expected to care for anyone after Thomas. It frightens me sometimes how quickly you've become important to me." Relief and joy spread across Mason's face. "We have time, Vivian. All the time you need." From the main room came the sounds of children laughing and Mrs. Patterson calling that the pies were ready for serving. The moment of intimacy would need to end, but Vivian sensed it represented a beginning rather than a conclusion. "We should join the others," she said, carefully closing the chalk box. "But Mason, thank you not just for this gift, but for everything. For the chalk that first day, for helping with the school, for this lovely Thanksgiving, for seeing me when I felt invisible." Mason's smile was tender as he offered her his arm. "The pleasure has been entirely mine, Mrs. Crawford." As they rejoined their guests, Vivian felt lighter than she had in months, as if the weight of uncertainty about her future had finally begun to lift. Whatever came next, she would face it knowing she was not alone. Winter settled over Pecos with a series of storms that made travel difficult, but ensured the schoolhouse remained full as families kept their children close to town. The additional firewood Mason had provided proved invaluable, as December brought unusually cold temperatures to the region. With Christmas approaching, the school buzzed with excitement. Vivian used Mason's colored chalk to create festive drawings on the blackboard, much to the children's delight. Together, they planned a Christmas pageant for the community, with the older students writing and performing a short play about the first Christmas while the younger ones sang carols. Mason continued his 3-day teaching schedule despite the winter weather, arriving sometimes on horseback when the roads were too muddy for wagons. The children had come to expect and appreciate his presence, and Vivian found herself increasingly dependent on their partnership, not just for teaching assistance, but for the companionship and support he provided. They had settled into a comfortable routine of shared Sunday dinners, alternating between the Pattersons' home and Mason's own. Occasionally, they spent quiet evenings by the fire at his house, discussing books or planning lessons, always maintaining a proper distance despite the growing closeness between them. The school's Christmas pageant, held the evening before the holiday break, brought the entire community together in the small church. Parents beamed as their children performed, and even Mr. Hargrove was seen to smile grudgingly at the obvious success of the school under Vivian's leadership. After the performance, as families mingled and shared Christmas cookies provided by the mothers, Mason drew Vivian aside. "I have a proposition for you," he said quietly. "One I hope you'll consider carefully." Vivian raised an eyebrow, curious. "What sort of proposition?" "The school is growing," Mason observed. 27 students now, and likely more by spring if the railroad continues bringing new families. It's too much for one teacher, even with part-time help. What are you suggesting? That we approach the council about expanding not just in numbers, but physically. The schoolhouse could be enlarged to accommodate 2 separate classrooms. You could take the younger children full-time and He hesitated, then continued. I could formally apply for the position of teacher for the older students. Vivian stared at him, surprised. You want to become a teacher? Permanently? What about your ranch? The ranch is established now. I've hired good men who can handle the daily operations. Mason's eyes were earnest. These past months in the classroom have reminded me how much I enjoy teaching. It's something I always wanted to pursue but set aside for family obligations. The idea was appealing, having Mason as a formal colleague rather than a volunteer, expanding the school as she and Thomas had once dreamed, providing better education for all the children of Pecos. Yet Vivian hesitated. People will talk, she said softly, about us working together so closely. People already talk, Mason pointed out with a slight smile. But they also respect what we've accomplished for their children, and if our personal relationship continues to develop, well, there would be nothing improper about a married couple teaching in adjacent classrooms. The implication made Vivian's cheeks warm despite the church's December chill. You're getting ahead of yourself, Mr. Reed. Perhaps, he acknowledged, but I'm a man who believes in planning for the future. Will you at least consider discussing the expansion with the council? The educational benefits stand regardless of other considerations. Put that way, Vivian could hardly refuse. Yes, I'll consider it. After the new year, perhaps. Mason's smile was radiant. That's all I ask for now. Christmas Day found Vivian joining Mason and several other families without extensive relations for dinner at the Reed house. The home had been decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and a small tree stood in the corner of the main room, adorned with paper ornaments made by the schoolchildren. The holiday passed pleasantly, with gifts exchanged, carols sung around the piano Mason had recently acquired, and an atmosphere of genuine warmth that eased the ache of Thomas's absence. When the other guests had departed, Mason presented Vivian with a final gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. For your thoughts, your lesson plans, your dreams, he explained as she ran her fingers over the soft leather. Whatever you wish to record. It's lovely, she said sincerely, but I'm embarrassed my gift for you seems inadequate in comparison. She handed him a carefully wrapped package containing a hand-knitted scarf in shades of blue that matched his eyes. You made this yourself? Mason asked, wrapping it around his neck immediately. Vivian nodded. During the evenings. It's not much. It's perfect, he assured her, his expression so tender it made her heart ache. Knowing you spent hours creating something just for me means more than any store-bought gift could. As January brought a new year, Vivian and Mason presented their proposal for expanding the school to the town council. To their surprise, the idea was met with enthusiasm from most members, with only Hargrove expressing reservations about the cost. The town is growing, Mr. Patterson pointed out. The railroad has brought 15 new families since summer, with more expected in spring. Our school needs to grow accordingly. And having separate classes for different ages is how schools are organized back east, Mr. Williams added, having become one of their strongest supporters since his son's academic improvement. The council voted to approve funds for expanding the schoolhouse and to officially offer Mason the position of teacher for the older students starting in the fall term. In the interim, they would maintain their current arrangement while construction proceeded. Throughout the winter and early spring, as the school addition took shape, Vivian found her relationship with Mason deepening beyond professional collaboration. They spent increasing time together, sharing meals, attending church functions, and enjoying quiet conversations about everything from teaching philosophies to favorite books to hopes for the future. By April, when the wildflowers began carpeting the plains around Pecos, Vivian realized she had passed a milestone without noticing she had gone an entire day without actively grieving Thomas. The realization brought a complex mix of emotions: guilt that she could forget even momentarily, relief that the sharpest pain had subsided, and gratitude for the new joy she had found. That evening, as they walked together after a school planning meeting, she shared this thought with Mason. "I feel as though I'm betraying him somehow," she confessed, "by being happy again." Mason considered this thoughtfully as they paused on the bridge over the small creek that ran through town. "Do you think Thomas would want you to grieve forever?" "No," Vivian admitted. "He was always practical about such things. When his mother died, he said the best way to honor those we've lost is to live fully in their absence." "Wise advice," Mason said softly. "Vivian, may I ask you something?" She nodded, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "It's been almost a year now since Thomas passed." Mason took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "I've respected your need for time to mourn, and I'll continue to respect whatever boundaries you need, but I want to be clear about my intentions." Vivian's heart raced as she met his gaze. "Your intentions? I love you," he said simply. "I want to build a life with you, teaching together, raising horses, perhaps someday having a family of our own. I want to court you properly, with the understanding that I hope someday you'll agree to be my wife." Though she had suspected this was coming, hearing the words spoken aloud made them real in a way Vivian hadn't fully prepared for. Yet instead of fear or hesitation, she felt a surge of certainty. "I would like that very much," she whispered, squeezing his hands. "To be courted by you, Mason Reid." The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the plains. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Mason leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both gentle and full of promise. When they parted, Vivian felt as though something had shifted in her world, not erasing the past, but making space for a new future alongside it. "Thomas will always be part of who I am," she said softly. "I would never ask you to forget him," Mason assured her. "He helped shape you into the woman I love." Throughout the spring, as the school addition neared completion, Mason courted Vivian with a consideration that endeared him further to her heart. There were small gifts, books he thought she would enjoy, wildflowers gathered on his morning rides, a specially commissioned desk for her new classroom. But more meaningful were the conversations, the shared dreams, the way he listened to her ideas as if they were precious. By the time the school term ended in June, their relationship was the worst-kept secret in Pecos, with most of the town simply waiting for an official announcement. It came on a warm evening in late June, after a community picnic celebrating the completion of the expanded schoolhouse. As townspeople gathered in the schoolyard to admire the new addition, Mason took Vivian's hand and led her to the front steps. There, in view of the community they both served, he knelt and presented a small velvet box. "Vivian Crawford," he said, his voice clear in the sudden hush that fell over the crowd. "You came into my life unexpectedly, but now I cannot imagine a future without you. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Inside the box was a ring not ostentatious, but beautifully crafted with a central sapphire flanked by small diamonds. It caught the evening sunlight as Vivian, tears shining in her eyes, extended her hand. "Yes," she said simply. "With all my heart, yes." The townspeople erupted in cheers as Mason slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to embrace her. Mrs. Patterson wiped away tears, while even Hargrove offered grudging congratulations. The children from the school surrounded them, peppering them with questions about whether they would still be their teachers after they were married. "Of course we will," Vivian assured them, laughing through her happy tears. "Mr. Reed and I love teaching almost as much as we love each other." They set the wedding date for August, allowing time for Mason's brother to travel from San Antonio and giving them the remainder of the summer to prepare before the new school year began. The ceremony would be held in the church, with a reception afterward at the Reed Ranch, which would soon become their shared home. As the summer progressed, Vivian divided her time between wedding preparations and setting up her new classroom in the expanded schoolhouse. The building now boasted 2 spacious rooms, one for the younger children under Vivian's instruction, one for the older students under Mason's guidance, with large windows to admit light and air, new blackboards, sturdy desks, and comprehensive supplies ordered from catalogs back east. Standing in her classroom one afternoon in early August, surveying the fruits of their shared vision, Vivian felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what Thomas had dreamed of: a proper school that would grow with the town, providing education that could compete with anything available back east. That she would be sharing that dream with Mason felt not like a replacement of her past, but an extension of it, honoring Thomas's memory while building something new. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with a gentle breeze tempering the August heat. In the small room at the back of the church, where Vivian prepared with Mrs. Patterson's help, she felt surprisingly calm. Her dress was simple but elegant ivory silk with lace trim, not white as befitting a widow, but not the severe gray or purple that might have been expected either. Around her neck, she wore the locket Thomas had given her on their wedding day, now containing a small photograph of him on one side and a lock of his hair on the other. "He would be happy for you," Mrs. Patterson said softly, noticing Vivian touch the locket. "Thomas always wanted your happiness above all else." "I know," Vivian replied with a gentle smile, "and I think he would approve of Mason. They share many of the same values, especially about education." When the church bells rang the hour, Vivian took a deep breath and prepared to walk down the aisle alone, a symbol of her independence and the strength she had found in widowhood. But as she stepped into the vestibule, she was surprised to find Mr. Patterson waiting. "I hope you don't mind," he said, offering his arm. "Martha and I thought you might allow me the honor of giving you away. Having known Thomas and seeing how he respected you, I believe he would want someone to stand in his place today." Tears threatened to spoil the careful powder Mrs. Patterson had applied to Vivian's cheeks. "I would be honored," she managed, taking his arm gratefully. The church was filled with the entire community, students and their families, shopkeepers, ranchers, even travelers staying at the hotel who had heard about the town's beloved teacher marrying the newcomer who had saved her school. At the altar stood Mason, more handsome than Vivian had ever seen him in a new suit, his expression transforming from nervousness to awe as she appeared in the doorway. Pastor Green conducted the ceremony with warmth and wisdom, acknowledging Vivian's first marriage with respect while celebrating the new beginning represented by her union with Mason. When they exchanged vows, Mason's voice was steady and sure, while Vivian's trembled slightly with emotion. "With this ring, I thee wed," Mason said, sliding a simple gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring. "And pledge to you my love, my support, and my partnership in all things as long as we both shall live." When Pastor Green pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause as Mason leaned down to kiss his bride. In that moment, surrounded by the community they served and united in purpose as well as love, Vivian felt a sense of completion, not an ending, but a new chapter in a story still unfolding. The reception at the Reed Ranch now, the Reed home in truth as well as name, lasted well into the evening. Tables had been set up beneath the trees, lanterns hung from branches to provide light as the sun set, and music played as couples danced on a wooden platform constructed for the occasion. Children ran playing between the adults, students delighted to see their teachers celebrating. Mason's brother James, who had traveled from San Antonio with his wife and children, regaled guests with stories of Mason's childhood exploits, much to the new husband's chagrin and Vivian's amusement. As the evening waned and guests began to depart, Vivian stood with Mason on the porch of what was now their home, watching the last wagons disappear down the lantern-lit drive. "Happy, Mrs. Reed?" Mason asked, his arm around her waist. The name still sounded strange to her ears, but pleasantly so. "Very happy, Mr. Reed," she replied, leaning against him. "Though I'll still be Mrs. Crawford at school, I think. The children are used to it, and it would be confusing to have two Mr. Reeds." "Whatever you prefer," Mason agreed easily, "though I must admit I rather like the sound of it." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. Then Mason turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I have one more wedding gift for you," he said, a hint of nervousness returning to his voice. "I hope you'll approve." He led her into the house and up the stairs to a door that had always been closed on her previous visits, the fourth bedroom, which he had not shown her during renovations. When he opened it now, Vivian gasped. The room had been transformed into a perfect memorial to Thomas. His desk from the schoolhouse stood against one wall, restored to gleaming condition. Bookshelves held his collection of educational texts and personal volumes. On the walls hung his diplomas, photographs, and the maps he had been particularly proud of creating to show the expansion of the United States. "Mason," Vivian whispered, tears filling her eyes. "How did you?" "I asked Mrs. Patterson to help me gather things from your house, items that were especially meaningful to Thomas's memory." Mason looked uncertain. "I thought you might want a place to keep them, to visit when you wish to remember him particularly. A place of honor in our home." The thoughtfulness of the gesture overwhelmed Vivian. That Mason would not only accept Thomas's place in her heart, but create a space to honor his memory in their shared home spoke volumes about the man she had married. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." Mason's relief was evident. "I want you to know that I'll never be jealous of your love for him. What you shared is part of who you are, and I love all of you, past, present, and future." Vivian reached up to touch his face, this man who had brought chalk and hope when she needed both most desperately. "And I love you for who you are, for what you've done for the school, for the children, for me, for understanding that love doesn't diminish when it's shared, but grows." Their kiss in that doorway, between past and future, was a promise not that life would be perfect or without challenges, but that they would face whatever came together, with respect for what had been and hope for what would be. Autumn 1879 found Pecos's expanded school thriving under the leadership of the Reeds. The addition of a second classroom and teacher had allowed for more specialized instruction, with Vivian taking the younger children through their first steps in reading, writing, and basic arithmetic, while Mason guided the older students through more advanced subjects, including the algebra and geometry he had studied in his engineering courses. The arrangement proved even more successful than they had hoped. Enrollment increased as families who might have sent older children to boarding schools back east opted to keep them in Pecos instead. Even Hargrove had been won over when his nephew, sent to live with him after his sister's death, showed remarkable improvement in Mason's classroom. At home, Mason and Vivian settled into the rhythms of married life with surprising ease. Their backgrounds complemented each other. Vivian's attention to domestic details balanced by Mason's practical ranch management. Her love of literature matched by his interest in science and mathematics, both united by their passion for education and community building. They maintained their Sunday dinner tradition, often hosting gatherings that brought together diverse members of the community, from ranch hands to the banker's family, from the new doctor and his wife to the elderly widow who sold eggs and butter from her small farm. The Reed home became known as a place of welcome, intellectual conversation, and genuine hospitality. By spring 1880, the school had grown again, with 34 students now divided between the two classrooms. The town council, seeing the benefits of their educational system, had approved funding for a small library addition to be built that summer, connecting the two classrooms and providing a shared resource for all students. It was during the planning for this addition, as Vivian reviewed architectural drawings with Mason one evening in early April, that she decided to share news she had been keeping to herself for several weeks. "The library will need to include children's books as well as reference materials," she commented, making notes in the margin of the plans. "Perhaps a special section with simpler stories for the youngest readers." "Of course," Mason agreed, "and we should consider future needs as well." "The town continues to grow." Vivian smiled, setting down her pencil. "Speaking of future needs, there's something I need to tell you." Mason looked up from the drawings, curiosity in his eyes. "What is it?" "I believe we'll be adding another student to the school in about 7 years," Vivian said softly, her hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "One who will carry both our names." For a moment, Mason looked confused. Then understanding dawned and his face transformed with joy. "Vivian." "Are you certain?" She nodded, her own happiness bubbling up as she spoke the words aloud for the first time. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Mason, in late October." Mason was around the table in an instant, gathering her into his arms with careful reverence, as if she had suddenly become fragile. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our child." "Our child," Vivian echoed, leaning into his embrace. "I hope he or she inherits your gift for mathematics. And perhaps my love of literature. And all the best of both of us," Mason added, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Though mostly I hope for your kindness and determination." As they stood together, plans for the school library momentarily forgotten, Vivian thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from that first meeting when Mason had appeared with chalk and copy books, saying simply, "Teach on. I'll help," to building a partnership that had grown into love, a shared vision for education in Pecos, and now, a family of their own. Life had not followed the path Vivian had once envisioned. Thomas's death had altered her course irrevocably, forcing her to find strength she hadn't known she possessed. Yet from that tragedy had come unexpected joy, not replacing what was lost, but building something new alongside the precious memories she would always carry. "What are you thinking?" Mason asked, noticing her momentary reflection. Vivian smiled up at her husband, this man who had seen her value when she felt most uncertain of her place in the world. "I'm thinking about chalk," she said, "and how the smallest things can sometimes change everything." "Chalk," Mason repeated, confusion giving way to understanding. "Ah, that first day at the schoolhouse, when you said you'd help," Vivian confirmed. "I was so afraid of failing, of losing the school, of disappointing Thomas's memory. Then you appeared with exactly what I needed most." Mason's smile was tender as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I like to think I was guided there, that someone was watching over you." "Perhaps," Vivian agreed, thinking of Thomas and how he would have approved of the man who now stood in his place not as a replacement, but as a continuation of the care he had always shown her. "All I know is that I'm grateful. For the chalk, for your help, for everything that followed." As they returned to their planning, now with thoughts of their child's future adding urgency to their educational vision, Vivian felt a profound sense of contentment. The school would continue to grow, serving the children of Pecos for generations to come. Their home would soon ring with a child's laughter. And the legacy begun by a young widow determined to keep teaching, and a cowboy who brought chalk would extend far beyond what either could have imagined on that autumn day when their paths first crossed. In the years that followed, Pecos continued to flourish, and with it, the school that stood as a testament to what commitment and vision could accomplish on the Texas frontier. By the time Thomas Reid, named for Vivian's first husband, began his education in 1885, he joined a school of 48 students divided among 3 classrooms, the youngest under Vivian's gentle guidance, the middle grades taught by a young woman who had been one of their first students, and the oldest still led by Mason. Young Thomas was soon joined by a sister, Elizabeth, born in the spring of 1883, and later by another brother, James, who arrived in the winter of 1886. The Reid home expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Mason adding rooms as needed and Vivian creating a home filled with books, music, and the lively discussions that characterized their partnership. Through it all, they remained dedicated to their shared vision of education as the foundation of community. The small memorial room for Thomas Crawford remained a place of honor in their home, and each year on the anniversary of his death, Vivian took their children there to tell them stories of the man who had first brought education to Pecos, and whose dream they continued to fulfill. When visitors to town remarked on the unusually advanced school for such a frontier community, locals would often share the story of the young widow who had struggled to keep teaching after her husband's death, and the cowboy who had brought chalk when it was needed most, a simple act of kindness that had grown into a legacy of learning that would shape Pecos for generations to come.